This is a Film Stories original podcast.
This episode is brought to you by Heyday. Feeling stressed? Take a moment for yourself with Heyday. Stroll through rows of golden wheat, tend to cute barnyard animals, and discover the joys of a digital farm retreat. You don't have to hop in a car or catch a plane. Escape to the farm at the tap of a finger. With Heyday, you're not just tending to a farm, you're tending to yourself. Heyday. Search Heyday, that's Hay space DAY, in your favorite app store. Heyday is a free-to-play mobile game and offers optional in-app purchases and random rewards.
Hilton brings you new ways to stay, with experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Walter Murch. Walter is a legendary editor and sound designer whose fingerprints are over some of the best films made in the 20th and 21st century, including The Conversation, Apocalypse Now, THX 1138, and many, many others. He's also a profound intellectual and thinker about film. His books include In the Blink of an Eye, The Conversations, a conversation between him and Canadian novelist Michael Ondaatje, and now a new book, Suddenly Something Clicked, a book which looks at editing and sound design and is the first of a series of books which will encompass basically Walter's life's work. This is a relatively short episode compared to other episodes because, as you can imagine, lots of people want to talk to Walter and we were only allotted a certain amount of time. But I really want you to enjoy this conversation for the rare chance and opportunity to sit down with someone who is really a great mind in world cinema and someone who, beyond being a practitioner and a craftsman, is really a great thinker in the art. Enjoy. Well, first of all, welcome to Writers on Film. It's an absolute honor to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
The first book I read of yours was The Conversations with Michael Ondaatje. And so in a sense, I feel like I've already had a conversation.
Right? Yes.
Because I overheard that amazing conversation that you had after The English Patient. How did that come about, and what was the sort of the philosophy behind that book?
Well, you'd really have to ask Michael, but it rose out of an interview that my wife, who's a radio producer in Berkeley in California, she interviewed Michael and me just after the opening of The English Patient, and I think something about how that conversation went interested Michael. And he was also at a point in his writing where he wanted to step away from fiction and do something more fact-based. And it must have been out of that combination of things that he decided to take on this project.
And so with Suddenly Something Clicked, your latest, this is more like a straightforward book that you're writing, but at the same time, there's nothing straightforward about it. It's absolutely... It struck me as an amazing... It had film editor in some way all over it, if you know what I mean. It's right. Little quotes at the bottom of the page and then QR codes to send you off to watch videos and things. How did that
you come up with that sort of structure?
Those two things, specifically the fact that I'm adding QR codes, and that at the bottom of every page, every even numbered page has a quote. Every odd numbered page has who said it. I've been collecting these over the last 40 plus years, and I have a little box full of them that I slice up into what I call fortune cookies. And when I teach or give a lecture, I spread them out on the table and say, come and take your pick. So this was an opportunity to give the readers of the book a sample of what I would do at a lecture or a teaching. And the QR codes were something that seemed natural because we are where we are in the third decade of the 21st century. And if you're writing about a sequence in a film, which I'm doing, I want the audience to see it. If I was there in person, I just hit a button and we'd look at it together. So the QR code is that button, and it's just a way to make that available. And those ideas were present from the very beginning when I started writing the book in 2020.
How does it feel as an editor to have your own work edited in terms of the book?
I welcomed it. There were two editors on the book. Walter Donahue, who's the head of the film division at Faber and Faber, proposed the book. And so as I would write each chapter, this was not in the contract or anything, but just because Walter is a friend also. As soon as I finished a chapter, I would have my wife read it. She's an excellent judge of when I get too dense about something, she tells me to thin it out. And then I would do that, and then I would send that to Walter, and he would have some observations about it. And then there was a copy editor, Ian Barami, who is someone who works for Faber, and here it was down to the fine little details. I didn't write it in the order in which it appears. I would just jump around from lily pad to lily pad. And as I say in the introduction, this book is maybe a third of the manuscript that I handed in 1983, 2023. When I had finished writing in the summer of 2023, I spent about a month pushing things around, and luckily, or by some guidance from some other power, it did gravitate into three different sections. And the first section is the book that you're looking at now.
No, it is recording. Sorry, I just saw the record button didn't seem to be lit.
I know the feeling. I know the feeling.
Wouldn't that be ironic?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the editing as well in terms of listening to you talk. The analogy reminds me of what you talk about in the sort of finished film to footage shot ratio. There seems to be a similar process with writing. There's how much you write and then how much you actually end up publishing.
Yeah, although in the case of a film, I don't know, to take Apocalypse Now as a good example, there were 230 hours of material to work with, and that was crafted down to 2 hours and 20 minutes, the original release. So that's roughly 100 to 1. Whereas in the case of the book, I would say the ratio is right from the beginning of the process to the end is probably it only shrank by maybe 15%, 10 or 15%.
There are certain films that come up again and again in the book as sort of films where you seem to have your philosophy has emerged and you've learned how to do something. So obviously one of these films is The Conversation, which is your first film as an editor. I had the opportunity, I've seen the conversation many times, but I had the opportunity of seeing it for the first time on the big screen in Bologna at the Cinema Ritrovato Festival last year. And it was so weird seeing a film which is set in a square, sitting in a square, watching it outside.
Yeah.
I couldn't help reading those sections of the book as well, and thinking of Gene Hackman's passing and how what a wonderful confluence of talent that film was.
Yeah, this was the first feature that I had ever edited. I'd edited some commercials and I'd edited some short documentaries. I'd worked on features as a sound supervisor, and I'd watched editing being done, picture editing. But after the success of The Godfather, Francis wanted to put his stake in the ground and not simply go on to Godfather Part Two, but to produce this film, which was an original screenplay. And he turned to me and said, "Well, you certainly should do the sound for this film, but you really should also edit the picture." And I said, "That would be great. Why do you think?" And he said, "Well, because Harry Cole, the Gene Hackman character, he is a sound man, and this film is told completely from his point of view. And you're a sound man, and so you will intuitively come to the right decisions about how to put the film together." Of course, for me, I mean, it was a fantastic opportunity, but terrifying at the same time, because uh, here was the film that had just made more money than any other film ever at that point in time. And now, what is this genius director going to do next? Well, it's a film about espionage. And who's going to edit it? Well, he's got this young, inexperienced sound person to edit it. I wonder how that will go. I knew that the glare of publicity would be definitely on me if the film was not a success. So I worked very long hours. I took everything very seriously and tried to get as much inspiration from whatever source I could get. I was working with another very talented editor, Richard Chew, who went on to edit One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Star Wars. He was my associate editor on the film. And out of that particular combination of things came the film.
I mean, it seems like again that Francis Ford Coppola provides you with an opportunity very much as an editor, because he's making so many films, but because he's shooting so much. Apocalypse Now, you talk about Apocalypse Now and being shot almost like a documentary at times, and that gives you a huge creative space in which to work as an editor.
Yes, that's a thread that runs through much of Francis's work, that there were elements of it in The Rain People. There are elements in The Godfather. The wedding scene at the beginning of the film was staged simply as a wedding party, with being covered like you would cover if you were a wedding cinematographer, but with, I think, 4 or 6 cameras. I can't remember exactly. And they just they had a party and they filmed it. And then they picked up a couple of more specific moments later. But yes, and the conversation itself in the conversation was also this free form event that was filmed by, again, 4 or 6 cameras in a real environment. With 95% of the people you're looking at in that section are just passersby. They don't know they're being filmed.
I mean, that seems like a real break with classic Hollywood, because you have Hitchcock and John Ford on one side, sort of editing in camera almost, not giving the editor much choice.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, you have sort of people like Altman, Francis Ford Coppola, Terrence Malick shooting huge amounts of footage and then finding the
Yeah.
film in the edit.
Yeah, I mean it's certainly a question of the moment right now with films like Adolescence. Here you have, it's a 4 episode, 4 hours, uh, each episode 1 hour long, and you start filming, and an hour later you're done. With the camera being placed on drones and going up in the air and then coming down and being put on the front of a car, all kinds of amazing technical stuff going on, but pretty impressive and invisible. And it's a wonderful experience, I'm sure, for the actors because it's as close as you can get to live theater as an actor. The actor, are in control of the arc of your performance, and there's all that tenseness that comes from you are in a sense backstage, and here comes your moment of entrance, and you only have one chance at it. It's got to be right. Of course, they did multiple takes of it and then selected the best one, but nonetheless, each take was like uh, a performance in live theater. On the other hand, it does not allow you to have the moment that you get in Lawrence of Arabia, the cut from blowing out the match to the sunrise, which is a brilliant leap, both forwards in time and space. The one-shot film is on purpose absolutely geared to the clock of real time. And one of the glories of cinema is that it is the first temporal art to really free itself from the straitjacket of time.
I think that shot in Lawrence of Arabia and probably the shot in 2001: A Space Odyssey are the two most famous
Yeah.
match cuts you can have in cinema. And 2001 is even longer in terms of time
Yes.
differential. um, when you look at people, how editing has changed, and this book is so amazing as a sort of history. Sorry, as a quick digression, or not so quick. You sort of bridge the two, the sort of studio, classical Hollywood, and the 70s. When you go back and you um, restore Orson Welles's Touch of Evil, and there's a chapter in the book about that. I just wanted to ask you about that for a moment. How was that experience and what you learned from it?
It was a wonderful experience. It came out of the blue. It was just a phone call from somebody that I did not know, who had actually seen the conversation at the Los Angeles Museum film screening. And the man's name is Rick Schmidlin, and he had finally found the complete 58-page memo that Wells had written that was believed lost for many years. And reading the memo, he understood almost immediately that half of Wells's notes concerned picture and the other half concerned sound. And so he thought of me because I do both of those things. And I asked him three questions, which was, what condition is the negative in? Um, what condition is the soundtrack in? Um, and let me read the memo. And the soundtrack was in good shape. It was monophonic, but it was split into three streams: dialogue, music, and sound effects. If that had not been the case, I wouldn't have taken the job because you have to unpick the tapestry of the sound to do many of the things that Wells wanted to have happen. It went very quickly. I think my participation in it maybe was 5 weeks at most. Um, and Wells's memo left a lot of interpretation. He never talked about frames or time or anything. He just said, this needs to be shorter or something like that. This needs
Right.
not to be so intercut. But he left up the decision about how to condense things and how to coalesce things that the studio had screwed up. Uh, that he left to whoever was reading the memo.
You talk about the wisdom of the hands
Yes,
in the book as well. That sort of almost like a musician, just and even practicing sort of hitting the space bar and checking that your rhythm is correct
yeah,
to where you're going to place the cut.
yeah. There's that. There's a line from Carl Jung where he says something similar to that. That if the hands can solve problems that the mind cannot. And basically, it means bypassing the frontal lobe of our brain, the logical part, and just allowing the brain's access to subconscious. Easy to say, difficult to actually do, but you do get into a kind of a stream state sometimes, both in writing and in editing and many other, arts where you're doing things, but you don't really know why you're doing them. You're just letting it happen. And that certainly was there was a crisis in the conversation where Francis had already begun shooting Godfather Part Two, and I was editing the conversation, and we were having problems with the film. We would screen it for audiences of 15 people, and we had not yet found the happy medium between Francis wanted the film to have a Hitchcock aspect and also a Hermann Hesse aspect, Steppenwolf, um, and those two things don't go together naturally. So how do you do that and make it a rewarding experience for an audience? So Francis basically, sometime in October of 73, he said, let's just shelve conversation until we're done with Godfather Part Two. My blood ran a little chilly at that moment because that would mean pushing the film. It would be at least a year before we would get back to conversation. So I went for a long run and decided on that run, no, I'm going to fight this. I called up Francis and said, give me another week. I have some ideas. I didn't at that moment know exactly what they were, but during that week, I just let my hands do the work, and it seemed to snap somehow. It suddenly something clicked.
Ah, the title of the book.
Yeah, and I took the film to where Francis was working up in Lake Tahoe, and he said, "This is great. Uh, let's finish the film. We'll release it on my birthday, which is April 7th of 1974."
And one of the big changes that you made there was inserting another line reading of the "He would kill us if he knew
Yeah,
about this."
that was yeah, that change came This is another wisdom of the hands moment in the sense that the film was locked and I was mixing it, and I got to the next to the last reel. I was mixing that all alone at 5 o'clock in the morning or something, and I thought, I remember a line reading of Fred Forrest where he said he'd kill us if he had the chance, but he said he'd kill us if he had the chance. And I recorded that line myself with Fred and Cindy Williams. Um, and I think we did 4 takes. That was the fourth take. And I remember thinking at the time, uh-oh, that's the wrong reading. But now, at 5 o'clock in the morning, I thought that it might be interesting so I scrambled around, found that line reading in the archives. This was all pre-digital, of course, and popped it in the film and took the film to New York, mixed to Francis, and explained to him what I had done, and he approved of it. And but so that was almost at the very last minute, that change.
Because that's the bit of the film that I remember from my very first viewing of the film. Or I mean, viewing is perhaps the wrong word, given that it's
Yeah.
an auditory experience.
Yeah, it's a cheat on the face of it because the whole premise of the film, right from the beginning, when Francis was writing the screenplay, was kind of an anti-Rashomon. Uh, the the pieces of the conversation that you will hear and see are exactly the same each time. It's just that as the film goes on, you know more and more, and so you interpret each of these moments differently. So here we are at the very end of the film, and I'm doing a sleight of hand thing, changing the line reading, which is forbidden. But I did it uh, because one of the problems that we were having that we were trying to solve through many different pathways was helping an audience understand that no, this boy and girl, young boy, young girl, are the murderers. They're not the victims. Harry thinks they're going to be killed. No, they are planning to kill somebody. Um, and if this were a Midsummer Murders type detective story, there would be a 3-minute scene where they'd be sitting at the pub talking about, oh no, that he thought this because of that, and this blah blah blah. But this was forbidden by the fact that this whole film is completely from Harry's point of view. You only know what he knows. And so the moment of understanding comes when he, in quotes, finally hears the reading that was there all along, but he interpreted it as he'd kill us if he had the chance. So, in a sense, we were too deeply in Harry's head for 90% of the film, and only at the end do we really hear the line the way it really was.
I mean, that totally worked. It totally fooled me because even after seeing it several times, I always assume that I've just misheard it the other times,
Yeah,
and the last hearing is the correct one.
right.
I'm assuming it's never changed. It's just my hearing of it has changed.
Right. And that so you're in Harry's head at that moment. That's what happens.
Absolutely. Um, throughout the book, sorry, there is there's a sort of history of the changing of technology, and you're very open to the changing technical landscape. You know, you move on to digital, for instance, and even as you sort of quite lovingly describe sprockets and splicing and glue and cement and whatnot. Um, how do you look towards the broader technological questions of cinema today, such as the even into the distribution model of streaming?
Yeah, it's this is a big change. I think there've probably been 4 big changes in the history of cinema, or in the history of motion pictures. Uh, so in 1901 was the invention of continuity editing in England in Brighton, the so-called Brighton School of
Yes.
Filmmakers. Yeah. Um, and that gave cinema wings. It could now take off, whereas Louis Lumiere famously in 1897 or something, an investor wanted to put money in his invention, and he said, "Don't bother, this is an invention without a future." Editing gave cinema the future that Louis Lumiere had denied it. The next big change was the coming of sound, the fusion of 2 different senses simultaneously, with intimate control over each of those, something no other art has. Then the coming of television, which is the the beginning of streaming in a way, the idea that you can have this in your home. Um, and then the digital revolution, which basically, let's say, the 1990s happened. Now we have artificial intelligence. How that's going to play out, it's too early to say. Uh, so it's beginning and has already begun to put its tendrils into the substance of cinema. Streaming is basically the natural extension of having television. It's there's always been streaming. It's just that now there's an economic model behind it, and you pay whatever it is, so many pounds or dollars or yen to get access to whatever it is that they want to show you, their library. You can look at it at any time, but there's this twist that Netflix does. There's some ungodly relationship between the New York Times and Netflix, where every month or so, the New York Times says, here are the films on Netflix that you must watch before they disappear. How, are they being
So
paid to do that? It's a strange thing. But so there's this, I better watch it soon before it disappears. Um, I, I I prefer nostalgically the original Netflix, which was based on DVDs and Blu-rays, where you had infinite, virtually infinite access to whatever you wanted at any time. Whereas now with Netflix, it's more restricted.
yeah, I must admit, I'm a big fan of Mubi as the sort of a curated streaming
Yes.
experience. But
Yeah,
even there, it's
I,
like,
I, I, in writing this book, the other occupation I had was I was the supervising editor on a 9 episode series by the South African artist William Kentridge. Um, and it premiered in Venice, actually, in April of last year. 9 30-minute episodes on what happens in an artist's studio. And that is now streaming on Mubi.
oh, excellent. Okay, I shall check it out. Check it
Yeah,
out. Um, your experience as a director, you've directed one film, Return to Oz.
right.
It's a wonderful film. By many people, it's seen as a real cult classic. I would concur with that. Um, Quite a dark vision, it has to be said, Walter.
Yeah, it's true to the books. Uh,
Right.
the 1939 film was a vaudevillian incarnation of The Wizard of Oz, the book which was written in 1900. He wrote, Baum, the author, L. Frank Baum, wrote, I think, 12 books in the series. It was as powerful a series then as Harry Potter is now. One book a year for 12 years. Um, but the books have this aspect to them, very metaphysically intriguing suppositions, especially. I read those books when I was 6 years old, 7 years old, and that was another connection with the Return to Oz, the film, is that it's based on two books that I read right at the beginning of my formation of my relationship with literature, meaning books that had more words than pictures. There's a lot of what's in me was put there by L. Frank Baum in writing those books.
And very politically subversive as well, Alfred.
Yeah, it's his mother-in-law was one of the big female suffragettes, liberation back in the 1870s. She was involved in the Underground Railway, getting slaves freed from the South. She was an honorary member of the Mohawk tribe in New York. In fact, she was so politically active that the other uh, people in the movement who wrote the book with her, there were three authors of that original book, they distanced themselves from her because she was so extreme. And he fell under her influence through his wife. And if you look at the politics of the land of Oz, it's a matriarchy. Military activity is laughed at, shown how foolish it is. You know, an army with 17 generals and one private, all of that kind of stuff. And the hero is Dorothy, a girl, and she manages to outwit the monsters such as the Gnome King in Return to Oz.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so we're coming towards the end, and I wanted to also talk a little bit about the state of editing today and sort of some of the more recent examples. I was talking to the editor of The Tree of Life recently, and I was connecting The Tree of Life to Oppenheimer as a film that seems to be edited in where the conventional scene seems to be disappearing. You've got much more like a series of shots telling the story. And I just
Uh-huh.
wondered, he was talking about how they would often use the very end of shots, that they would actually cut out the whole of the scene and just use the very end of each scene with no dialogue. That's
Yeah.
why Tree of Life is very dialogue free. When you look at that sort of picture, Tree of Life, Oppenheimer, which are experimenting a lot with pushing editing,
Yeah.
how you feel about
Well, you know, as uh, Bella Balash says in the book, uh, cinema is the only art whose birthday is known to us. It's very, very new in human experience. And as we were saying earlier, it's not an art, it's a meta art. It's a portmanteau of all different kinds of arts that all have this kind of uneasy coherence within themselves. And I think what you're talking about is allowing that slight incoherence to have a say and to pass that on to the audience to allow them to make up their minds. And I think that's a very profound way of thinking about where cinema is most effective. It's so powerful as a representation of reality that the danger is that it can crush the butterfly of its theme by its very power to represent it, and that it has to find wherever it can uh, metaphorical situations that are slightly dissonant with each other, um, and to allow the audience to make the final completion. And when that is achieved, the really kind of intriguing thing about it is that although the person in the audience is making the connection, they project that connection onto the screen as if it's coming from the screen, not from them. And so the film now has this personal aspect to it. How does it know my secret thoughts? Well, it knows them because you projected them onto it. Um, so that's that thing. I think I refer to it in the book as this paradox of mass intimacy. It's a mass medium, but you want each person to feel that the medium is talking to them in a dialect only they really understand.
I wonder if that's what Kubrick was hinting at when he titled his last film Eyes Wide Shut. There's this idea that you are you're in the dark, and in your book you talk about how you're blind when you move your
Yeah.
eyeballs. Um, we have shutters in our eyes the way that
It's
projections.
I'm trying to recall a quote. I think it was during uh, what's his film about? I've just blanked for a moment. The film about the Vietnam War.
Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah, Full Metal Jacket. Um, one of the actors performing, they did many takes, and Kubrick said, "Let's do another one. Let's do a 30-second take or something." And the actor, who was exhausted, said, "Well, didn't you feel that last take was real?" And Kubrick said, "Real is good, interesting is better." So, he's getting at that borderline between, did this, do you feel this is authentic, or is it taking you somewhere that you haven't been before, which is interesting?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've got one last quote for you, which is you were talking about having your quotes on little pieces of
Yeah,
paper that you. I do the same thing, and I have William Hazlitt said, "Wit is the salt of conversation, not the food." And I
yes,
always love that when I'm
yeah,
writing. I'm always thinking, hang on, not too many of those little jokes.
right,
You've got to use them sparingly.
yeah, exactly.
Walter, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Okay, my pleasure. Thanks again for inviting me.